talking now of 76, right?
Yeah.
It seems to be very clear that when these when they are by themselves, these enemies of Islam, right? They say to each other, "Do you tell them of God's revelations to you, and thus provide them with support for the argument?"
Right.
In other words, they are withholding information,
Right. Exactly.
and this would be. Just a moment, I have it right here. Isn't this also connected with 42 of the same chapter, verse 42?
Yes.
Do not confound the truth with falsehood, nor shall you conceal the truth knowingly.
But
It was
they
very
do.
clear
Some of them.
that because he's talking to the children of Israel. It seems that the children of Israel, we knowingly were trying to withhold information from others.
No, from us, from the Muslims.
Yeah, from the others, non-Jews.
Right.
Yeah, I understand.
Right. So, well, of course, the person who talked to the Muslims, then,
Yeah.
the person who's reading the Quran.
Now, this is what I was trying to mention this morning. That one.
The 75 should be, do you Muslims expect them, the children of Israel, to believe as you do, and so forth.
Yeah. This is what I was trying to mention this morning, that one defect of some of the Jews is that they consider these revelations for themselves alone. They will make it national. And
But you or I may say something that is true, it is from the Quran, and there is support for it in the Bible.
yeah,
Like, for example, there will come a prophet after Moses from his kinsmen who will give us all truth, and they see this in their Bible, but they want to hide that. They don't want to give you any support
yeah, because they're taking these revelations only for
their own benefit.
sectarian purposes. And if I may also, with your permission, also look at their selfishness, even on verse 18. Well, others have pointed this, that they consider themselves so much of a special group of people that even hell is not eternal for them. They say, we will not suffer in hell except for a few days. So even that, they consider their privileges. They were a chosen people and so on.
That's right. We are God's beloved.
Yeah, and so on. And yet, your title, next one, says, the children of Israel rebel. Terrible.
Okay, we're going to finish up to 79, and then we're going to eat cake. We're at 77.
Yeah.
Do they not realize that God knows everything they
They
conceal and
conceal.
everything they declare? Among them are illiterates who do not know the Scripture except through hearsay and conjecture. Therefore, woe to those who distort the Scripture with their own hands, then say, this is from God, seeking a cheap gain. Woe to them for distorting the Scripture, and woe to them for their illicit earnings. So there are lots of people who rely, who receive the Scripture through other people. And distortion of the Bible or the Quran or the divine teaching is a serious offense, because it misleads those people who have no access or who cannot read or write.
But are those people chosen to be the ones who mislead?
Well, yeah, they must deserve it. I mean, the whole thing is computerized to fit together. But this does not negate the punishment and retribution for those who distort the Scripture, for other tools.
Can we not just go to the next string because they're connected? It's a pity because for the train of our thinking.
Okay.
Because the question is whether these things come from God. They say, we will not suffer in hell except for a few days. Say, did you take such a promise from God? In other words, is it found in your scriptures?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is correct.
Yes.
So, because they say this is from God. No, 79, they're saying this is from God.
Yeah.
And 80, Allah says, well, this thing that you're claiming, that you will not suffer in hell except for a few days, Is this found in the scripture?
Did you take such a promise from
All together? And Allah never breaks His promise. Or do you say about God what you do not know? You ascribe something to Him. So I think it follows from 79, no?
Yes. Go ahead. What to finish that?
Indeed, anyone who works evil and becomes surrounded by sin, these have deserved hell. They will abide therein forever. But this is the counter argument. There is no such thing as temporary hell.
Of course, I must mention also this one, the Ahmadis believe in. The Ahmadiyya movement in Islam. But hell is not a thing. This is exactly what. And if you read the translation, there's a red book by the Ahmadiyyas, they will not say, they will not use the words I'm using here. Forever. You will never see it. You will see forever only when it applies to heaven, but not when it applies to hell.
And it is also...
And God is looking at that. Even though the Arabic words at the end of 81 and 82 are identical, their translation will not be identical.
May I also...
In all the translations, excuse me, go ahead.
May I add that after the Quran says this, after the Quran is blaming or blaming these Jews for saying this, and it's very clear, the Quran is saying that these Jews who say this are wrong.
Yeah.
There are many Muslims, not only the Ahmadiyyas, who are falling into the very same presumption as these Jews whom the Quran is condemning. Because they say that the Prophet will intercede for them. And therefore, the Prophet will snatch them away from hell.
Exactly.
So they say the very same thing,
Except words.
which the Quran condemns as an action done by Jews.
You see what the Ahmadiyya say in their
So no
translation.
improvement, we're not improving.
God can read to us 82 and 83, even the numbers are found there.
Yeah.
82.
It will be 82, yeah, or 81.
Yeah. They say the fire shall not touch us except for a number of days. Say, have you taken such a promise from Allah? Then Allah will never break His promise. Or do you say of Allah what you know not? The doctor says. Whoso does evil and is encompassed by his sins, those are the inmates of the fire. Therein shall they abide. But they who believe and do good works, those are the dwellers in heaven. Therein shall they abide. This uses the word
Yeah.
abide.
But they skip the word.
Forever. They didn't say forever.
I see.
And when you ask them, abide, does this mean forever? They say no. Even though the word in Arabic is forever. هم فيها خالدون.
Khalidun. They will.
خالدون forever. But they have that mosque from Speedway. If you wonder about that mosque. It's one of the things they believe in.
It's the same thing also with the translation of Muhammad Ali, I think.
Right, he's an Ahmadiyya.
Yeah. But he has decided to go back.
Did it?
Yeah, because they split.
I didn't know that.
There are two, the Rauba group, this is the Rauba group, and the Lahori group. The Lahori group is becoming closer to the others. And this group has been declared by law as a separate sect, not Islamic.
Not Muslim.
Yeah.
They're forbidden from going to Mecca with Medina. So they're forbidden to go to Mecca? Yeah. I think this is non-Muslim. Okay, Al-Fatiha. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Did you see Aisha? She sat down to read Al-Fatiha. She was standing up.
What's
She sat down and Aisha.
With wearing shoes.
Yeah, few Muslims. There are Muslims who they are making sajda. They say Subhana Rabbil A'la. are worried about their shoes.
Oh, worrying about that.
That might be lost. That is Muslim. For a moment, I was a cigarette Muslim. I was worried that somebody might step on my cigarette.
That must be me, because I was next to them.
No, but how about the shoe?
No, but to get rid of that, I usually wear red socks now.
Yeah, sometimes you lose shoes. Because sometimes you lose your good shoes.
It does happen. People steal them.
Yeah, so to get rid of that, so I just wear my pants or I put, if I wear my shoes, I put my shoes on the locker. Sometimes somebody...
I want to ask you something. Why she cried? Ask me why she cried. Now, Ammo.
Yeah.
That is consistent to... What is the one that I... It's chapter 3, no?
You said,
On the Leviticus?
yeah, 3.
Do me a favor, Ammo. When you have time, if you will read, it's in chapter 3. Leviticus. The one that I made in notes. Yeah. Quran, as far as I know, has 9 or 10 times saying, why did you kill your prophet? 6 says prophet, 3 say Rasul. Very interesting, no? Sometimes says, at least 3 times, why did you kill your prophets?
Yeah.
No, messengers, 3 times.
Yeah.
Why did you kill your prophet? I think this is a little bit important. So not only did they kill prophets,
Yeah.
but they have killed Rasul.
Yes.
It's terrible, huh? It's terrible.
You're right. Yeah.
No. Going in. They also say, I think that talking to the prophet, right? The Jews prophet. God has enjoined us from believing any messenger unless he shows us an offering
Yes.
consumed by Holocaust.
Right. This is looking for Muhammad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Say, messengers did come before me
Exactly the things you wanted.
with profound signs,
Yeah.
including what you are now asking.
Right.
Now, what you're asking is something extraordinary, right? A Holocaust, a miracle, like a miracle, right?
Yes. But they killed them.
Why? Why did you kill them?
Yeah.
Now, Ammo, in Leviticus, if you have time to read, Leviticus 9, 22, 24, the Jews tell Moses, we want the same thing,
Yeah.
a Holocaust burn.
Yeah.
I mean, a sacred burn.
And he showed them.
And fire came
Right.
from heaven, and they all prostrated themselves. Therefore, this is referring to that incident. And when he says, why did you kill the messenger? I think they have killed Moses.
I wouldn't be surprised.
How would you know that Freud has written one whole book, Moses and Monotheism, trying to show psychoanalytically that the Jews have killed Moses, that's why they have this guilt? Now, I've discussed this with ulama. The ulama tells me, well, why doesn't the Quran not specifically say? I said, when this revelation is recited by the prophet and telling the Jews, why did you kill? The Jews know. Do you know that the encyclopedia, Jewish encyclopedia mentions that there is a suspicion in the book of Hosea that the tribe of Ephraim, yeah, one of the sons of Joseph, is responsible for the killing of, is a legend among the Jews. Now, can you imagine? This was pointed out 100 years ago by a scholar by the name of Selin.
Yeah.
100 years ago, a Protestant scholar showed that there is a tradition among the Jews about that they killed Moses. And Freud, 1920s, when we were born.
Yeah.
It took them all the time to discover something when the Quran already suggesting it. It's amazing. I've written an article on that.
Yeah. It is amazing.
I don't know if this is good for... I've written this. And I've shown it to the ulama.
But the Jews don't deny it. I mean, they don't care. In fact, they go out of their way to desecrate and disrespect Moses, even now.
According to Freud, he even suspects that the reason why they killed Moses was because he was not only very tough, but in the long run they recognized that he was an Egyptian. In other words, Moses was a prophet of the Jews, but he, by racially, he is an Egyptian.
No, he was a Hebrew.
No, according to Freud, I'm just not by the.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah. Well, he grew up as an Egyptian in the house of Pharaoh, you know, but he was a Hebrew 100%.
But according to this, he's a Hebrew because the mother is
100%.
Hebrew. Yeah.
The mother and the father.
But it's very interesting how a psychologist tries to prove something, and he quoting a Protestant. But if Freud knows what we're talking about, he would put it there to support his view.
Yeah.
Because he was very ruthless.
I don't know if it is good or bad. But I don't know which is the lesser evil. Is it the disrespect of the prophet or the idolization of the prophet? I mean, I don't know which is the. I think the idolization is worse.
And yet, by all logic, I didn't mention it enough because I didn't want to take time. In general, the Jews have more chance than the Christians to be righteous.
And the Muslims.
Yeah. Because, the Christians are so worked up with Jesus.
Yeah.
It is becoming terrible. They make him a god. At least the Jews do not have that.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying that it is worse to idolize the prophet. I think Satan made a mistake, I mean, Satan worked on having the Jews disrespect their prophets and messengers. But this backfired because a higher proportion of Jews worship God.
Yeah.
Without idolizing their prophets and messengers. And he didn't like that, so he tried the other extreme.
I know, I can see now.
Yeah, so he did the other extreme
Like
with the
too
Christians.
much,
Exactly.
too much, and they made him a god.
That's right. And then when he came to the Muslims, he did exactly what he did with the Christians, but in a concealed
But
way.
you see, Satan is learning also by speed.
That's right. Exactly.
He's improving
Yeah.
himself.
I mean, he got the Jews to kill the prophets, kill Moses,
Yeah.
kill the messengers,
Now the extreme.
desecrate them and disrespect them, and this made
It's very
them,
beautiful, huh? Yeah, that's very beautiful.
and this made them worship God. And he said, "Uh-oh, I don't want that. Let's make them idolize the prophet." And
I was
they did.
reading another book. I think the one I showed you, that they bought for us. Oh, the Jewish? Yeah. That they killed Jeremiah. He said they killed Jeremiah.
Oh yeah.
When they were running from Babylonia to Egypt, and this prophet was escorting them, they killed him.
What about Isaiah and Ezekiel and all the others? I think they killed most of them.
No. I know Jeremiah because I read in a book. And it's very interesting because the
I know there's some
description
that were killed, but I can't remember which one.
of how they tore the robes of Aaron in the Bible. It's very good. It's almost an execution. They tore his robes, you remember?
Yeah. He was weaker than Moses. He took advantage of him.
No. That's why the secrets that that's why they say the Jews are terribly afraid of this. Because it's telling them so many things.
Yeah. In fact, it says that in one of the verses. That this Quran tells the children of Israel too many things.
It's there, and they know it.
Yeah.
And they know it as they know their children.
Oh, it says that it tells the children of Israel many of the things that they are disputing. Are you familiar with that verse?
Yes, of many times. Of course, yes.
So it specifically says what you just said. It's amazing that Bacon was quoting it the other day.
I wrote an essay on this, and I showed it to some Arabs. One of them was a Syrian minister of sanitation. He liked the essay. Very short essay. The other one was lazy. And he said, put it in summary. So Dr. David told him, well, but Professor Mahmoud says it's this, that the Jews killed Moses and maybe Harun. Do you believe it or not? You know this Arab says?
Yeah.
He said, those Jews are capable of anything, I believe it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's lazy too.
Yeah.
And yet you must really, there are many of them who are really righteous, some of these Jews. They really. But the Quran says a few of them, doesn't it work few?
Yeah.
Few of them.
Alaikum salam. A few of those, I don't know, it seems to me that it's the same proportion to God.
Some. But
Few of those, few among the Christians and few among the Muslims who make it. It's just,
some of them are righteous. But
Makes no difference.
some of them are righteous.
yeah.
What do you work in Arabic? You? Some? What is that?
وَالْمِنْهُمْ أُمَّةٌ قَائِمَةٌ وَكَثِيرٌ
Minal.
منهم أمة قائمة
Yeah.
وكثير منهم ساء ما كانوا يعملون.
Is Jeremiah
What I did? What did I tell you?
every time that came up to
I told Abdul Mahmoud to stop. But
hill, they used to prepare to consult monarchy, and every time they come up there,
yeah.
what's Jeremiah?
But in this book,
Samuel,
you ordered, you want to consult with Samuel.
Well, Samuel is when they wanted.
they picked some messengers up, and every time they come up, they get struck by lightning. It's not the same thing.
No. Some of they didn't want to fight until they have a commander or something. So Saul was appointed.
Yeah. And they had Holocaust.
Yeah.
There is another one also about the Holocaust. It was in a mountain and they asked, I think it's Jeremiah, this is the book. I'll let you read the book. But it's a matter of probability. And most probably, the Israelis are told to the Jews, they know what is being revealed.
Oh, yeah.
But if you take an Arab, they don't care. I mean, if you take an Arab, they don't care. Oh, what the
Really?
They never heard of it until you start. But the Jews know.
Yeah. The Quran says they know too.
Like their own children.
Yeah, exactly.
But otherwise, you imagine many Jews have become Muslims. And then they were followed into the population and so on.
Yeah, but the whole surah is named after that passage too, so there's got to be a lot of stuff in there that we just can't
A lot of
see.
significance.
Too fast over it tonight. We really didn't discuss it.
I think we were doing it now.
We don't have any deadlines to meet. We go immediately. Yeah.
That's our life now.
So that's one thing I was wondering if the relationship, there's any relationship to why they were keeping that special calf, the heifer, which was yellow, and if there's any
But
relationship.
they're all yellow. God was not referring to a specific cat. He just went along with their demands. But
Maybe that it was a special one.
no, there were many of them. Just to pick out anyone that satisfies these descriptions. Yellow, not too old, not too young. Was never worked. As bright color, pleasing to the beholders, and there isn't any blemish in it. There are lots of them.
They are hiding something. These people don't want to do it because they're hiding something. They don't
They're
want
just complicating things, like you said.
But they also don't want the truth to come out.
Right, that too. It's just symbolic.
Yeah, because the truth comes out. Where is it?
At the top then,
Yeah, Allah
71.
reveals what he tries to conceal.
Yeah, 72. That's about the murder though.
Yeah, was the murder before or after they
In
killed
71 it says, now you've brought the truth.
Yeah. They mentioned that after they mentioned the sacrifice. Did the murder occur after that? Or was it already
Well,
occurred?
probably simultaneously. Yes.
Was it a murder in conjunction with not wanting to kill that calf, the heifer?
But they didn't have any premonition as to what the relationship. After the slaughter of the calf, then God said, strike the victim with part of the calf. And that was the way of resurrecting the dead. So those were the days that's where God was doing all these visible miracles, and then we're told in 17 that God stopped that because it didn't do any good anyway. I mean, they saw all the miracles. Moses split the sea in front of them, they crossed it, they had manna and quails, they had springs gush out of the rocks, and all this, then they worshipped the calf, So in Surah 17, God says, I stopped all this miracle because it didn't do any good anyway.
Yeah.
But they still attribute miracles to Muhammad, even though the Quran says, I don't do this anymore. Yeah.
Very lucky people, huh? Oh yeah, lucky people. Huh? But as you say, these lucky people also is a terrible burden.
Oh yeah, it's a fantastic blessing or a terrible curse. And the same is true with the Quran. Look how Israel is defeating the Arabs. What a scam this is. It just doesn't make sense. Of course it makes sense in light of the Quran, but I mean on the physical level it doesn't make sense at all.
Another bad group.
Taking each other's tyranny.
What's your interpretation about these people become tyrants on earth again?
Yeah, Surah 17. 17. First 10 verse.
Yeah.
This is now the second time. Israel today is the second time. The first time was probably Hitler or the Babylonian.
Well, I don't think it would be Babylonian because, I mean, they had already been kicked out of Israel, out of the territory,
I see.
by the Romans before the Quran's coming down. And the way you translated, the 2 times are in the future.
Yeah, all right.
So it would have to be
And they're
after.
still coming up?
Well, what I was wondering if the Arab invasion thing was early on, like around 48, when they were fighting with the Arabs in that land, and they were fighting back and forth. I don't know enough details about that.
Well, what is happening in Israel now, my understanding is
Because the Arabs have to attack them in that land. Now, the invasion of Egypt in with the 67 didn't actually get into Israeli property.
When
Even 73 didn't come into Israel property, so it didn't invade them in their homeland.
Besides, but the invasion has to be by real belief. It have to be people like what we have here in this mosque.
there's something
No, if the servants, they're still doing it because God commands you to defend the unbelievers against them.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't, God
have to be
creates a
right.
situation that sends them in. The people that invade don't actually have to be believers. They may think they are fighting for certain causes, all
But
kinds
they're
of.
still servants of God anyway.
Yeah, they're
Unwilling servants of
Yeah.
God.
yeah, but performing something.
Right.
so I know they were fighting the Arabs in
I hope
that.
your tooth feels better tomorrow.
You know,
In
Carl,
48, over the Mandate, they were fighting the British and the Arabs.
When I have a bridge,
especially the Muslims,
you
who drive out eventually the Jews, so that they will inherit the land.
Yeah.
But that was
It's probably also the
Jews confirmed.
That's a right step ahead of it. It's like being you oppress among the Jews,
Yeah.
You want
who
to?
will do away with and they are the Oriental Jews.
I'm going to have the whole book done on
But then they're the ones that are supporting it now.
That's part of it. They will support it, but they will be the very ones who will
We're going to send the first in February.
directed. It's an oppressed people against the European
You
Jews.
can make copies of this.
And they're supporting this to
You want a
come
copy?
from them. But that's part of
Okay.
the work.
book comes out, then I will.
Maybe it
You
means
get
that
those book too, yeah.
there's
All
a
right.
fight
This
between
is
these two groups.
beautiful. I mean,
And
it's
these are
clearer
to
than
inherit.
Yeah.
This is that the
Very
number will
important
inherit.
for all of us. Yeah.
That's the good thing.
When the book comes out, I'm going to send the whole bunch to Greta.
You know what happened to my wife? They have to take away everything.
Oh,
Everything, yeah.
Only the upper teeth,
All the other ones.
but not the lower.
And even that is the next batch. They want the
no, they're going to do some operation.
operations on. You know, she was in a concentration camp, according to her. Yeah, and all of the lack of vitamins and something of the young women, she seems to be part of it. So what happened is that those days that she gave, the only thing I can eat, because she cannot eat, but this is someone, poor woman. She likes it very much. Poor woman.
You're going to have the artificial teeth? I mean, dental? Yeah. Well, they do fine. They're just as good as the real teeth.
And they look the same way like the original. My mother is 88 years, my mother. She has perfect teeth, except for 2, which are seen. But
Wow.
all is complete.
You saw my father. My father has all his teeth.
These are his?
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, you mentioned
All of them. All his teeth. Not even a filling. Yeah. Alaikum salam.
How about you think? Are they good? Or?
Yeah.
I was asking you, do you know the English name for these monotheism?
I don't know. I thought it was a strictly different thing.
No.
Yeah.
I know how the leaves look like that, and they're like this,
Yeah.
very slimy. This grows in our country.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It's very common.
No, I brought seeds with you from Egypt. Alaikum salam.
I also, you know what?